Hello, my name is Vasilios. Today is March 10th, 2022. Who do I have the pleasure of speaking with today?
Good morning. My name is Cunniff. I am the director for the Environmental Resource Management Department for the Seminole Tribe of Florida.
Fantastic. And if you can start off with speaking a little bit about your background. So you have quite an extensive background in the private and public sector. Can you just talk to me about that?
Sure. Going back to my graduate work at Florida International University, I worked in a marine, coastal and estuarine marine ecology field under Dr. Jim Forkran, and had quite a lot of opportunity to understand how, in particular, water quality affects coastal and estuarine environments of South Florida. My specialty at the time was seagrass environments within Florida Bay and the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary, and understanding the nature of how nutrients within the water column were affecting those benthic communities. The long-term research that my professor had been conducting was starting to show that there were some marked changes in those benthic communities resulting from changes in nutrient availability and loading rates coming from land use changes in the Florida Keys. Similarly, in Florida Bay, there was a focused attention to understand the role of not only just nutrients, but general water quality parameters, mostly more physical parameters such as salinity. But water quality plays a part in terms of controlling some of the phytoplankton growth that would otherwise be problematic for seagrasses that depend on light. And so too much phytoplankton leads to seagrass die-offs. I'm sure you've all heard all about the widespread seagrass die-offs that we've had in the Indian River Lagoon, within Florida Bay on a couple of different instances here over the last 20 plus years, and so on and so forth. So from my graduate work, I actually went to work with the South Florida Water Management District, which is a state agency here that controls freshwater distribution and availability for 16 counties in South Florida, and includes counties up north of Lake Okeechobee for the Kissimmee chain of lakes. So it essentially outlines the historic Greater Everglades, at least as it's defined by those political boundaries at this time. And my work was with a group focused on Florida Bay ecology, establishing baselines, trying to understand status and trends in order to create and develop and test models of how Everglades restoration and some of the changes in hydrology, some of the changes in freshwater delivery, the overall changes in those biogeochemical cycles that would accompany more freshwater back into the system are going to affect those benthic seagrass communities and pink shrimp, things of that sort. I was with that group for 5 years. I spent a year with the Water Management District Stormwater Treatment Area Group. And stormwater treatment areas currently are a tool that the district uses in order to try and receive water from the Everglades agricultural area. They are man-made marshes that are designed to uptake nitrogen and phosphorus that is very high rates of loading coming off of ag land, allowing the plants to uptake those nutrients by a very complicated system of different native plant communities, aquatic and emergent plants, and with their residence time being tweaked, the output, is supposed to meet targets set for water that can be then delivered into the natural areas, the water conservation areas to the south, and ultimately into Everglades National Park. From there, I did spend a few years in the private sector. Water quality in terms of those impacts, I suppose, would be still pertinent in that I actually worked on the Deepwater Horizon spill. Wow. I was part of a group that was assessing the impacts to seagrass habitats and coastal marshes along the northern Gulf Coast, and to the degree with which those restoration strategies could be put forward to restore those particular habitats that were impacted. And ultimately from there, it led me back to the state by way of the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, where I was the research coordinator at the Rookery Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve, which is a 140,000 acre component of coastal lands, mangrove habitats, and nearshore environments. Basically, the border takes over from where Everglades National Park leaves off in the 10,000 Islands and extends up to the Gordon River in Naples. So that whole swath of the 10,000 Islands and Marco Island, that whole area is covered under the reserve, part of the National Estuarine Research Reserve system. Water quality was one of the fundamental programs that all of the NERS undertake, and with similar methodologies in order to understand the role of water quality, in particular nitrogen and phosphorus, in how coastal and estuarine habitats are trending across the country. Obviously, Florida is rather unique in our distribution and assemblage and diversity of different coastal habitats, and the manner in which the sensitivity of those habitats are very different than some other places. I was with Rookery Bay for better than 3 years. Long story of how my wife, who was also at Rookery Bay at the time, managed to find a new opportunity with the Seminole Tribe, led me to the Seminole Tribe. And I actually spent 2 years working in the museum. It was a big shift, but one for which was really preparing me to take on the role that I have today, and one for which I think was absolutely critically essential for me. Working and serving the tribe has been the greatest professional satisfaction that I've been able to have in my 20 plus years. And being able to be immersed in the culture of the tribe is absolutely essential to understand how to best serve a sovereign nation, a group of people whose ancestry on this land spans thousands of years, and for which there are unique perspectives that I have been able to gain and have really been able to come full circle to better understand. For example, as the tribe is a key stakeholder and actual stated partner in Everglades Restoration, as being one example, the tribe has different opinions and understandings, or rather, I guess, concerns about the manner in which Everglades Restoration is proceeding, and the degree to which all of the federal and state agencies and universities, not-for-profits, all of whom are very well-intentioned, there is so much politics, there is so much in the way of special interests, there is, unfortunately, a lot of things that don't need to be involved here in order for us to achieve what the stated goals are. And the needs of the tribe in terms of Everglades restoration are not at all exclusive to the overall goals and needs and objectives of Everglades restoration that would serve the entirety of Florida citizens who depend on the Glades to be able to live here in South Florida. For you all up in the Gainesville area, where you still think that you are maybe removed from the Everglades, in fact, you are not. The water underneath this ground is a river of water that moves all throughout the state, moves north, moves south, based on head differences of water on the land. And that is very much affected by the water that ultimately is here on the southern part of the peninsula. So our future of being able to have Florida, in particular South Florida, continue to be a place for people to live is directly dependent upon whether or not Everglades restoration, in the way that it can be, is going to be successful. So, not to mention that from the perspective that I have now with the Seminole Tribe of Florida, we're also talking about culture and tradition of human beings that cannot be replaced, and for which they cannot up and move and leave. This is their home. They're going to be here. And so where the tribe may have been viewed in the past as being an obstacle, and I heard that from people that I worked with in my capacity with the state, directly saying, the tribe is standing in the way of Everglades restoration. I know so much better now where that is a false narrative, and where, quite frankly, the narrow focus on nitrogen and phosphorus in particular is really a key driver of whether or not Everglades restoration can be successful. So there's a brief thing. I could talk for weeks about that, but I know you want to ask more specific questions.
So you kind of mentioned ongoing efforts for restoration of the Everglades. There's currently a bill going on in the Florida Senate, SB 108, I think it's called, but which has the potential to kind of alter the way we approach Everglades pretty dramatically. Would you mind kind of speaking about how that kind of your perspective on that bill?
You're referring to the bill that kind of is talking about the savings clause for agriculture and water supply. So, yes, this has been a recent, development of controversy amongst, mostly Florida legislators and the Water Management District at this point. There is a very complex series of negotiations and in terms of how Lake Okeechobee is going to be managed for the next 10 years. The tribe has been extremely engaged on this matter for the better part of 2 years since the Lake Okeechobee Systems Operations Manual, or LOSOM, has been in development through the Army Corps of Engineers. Now, the tribe as a sovereign nation enjoys a different relationship as a stakeholder than the Water Management District or any other agency or private stakeholder. The tribe enjoys a government-to-government relationship with the federal government, meaning that the United States deals with and approaches the Seminole Tribe in the same way it would Canada, Mexico, or any other country. And the tribe has right to consultation that goes above and beyond what is otherwise made available to the general public in terms of how a federal project or an effort is proceeding. And so that is where the tribe has its opportunity to engage and to provide its concerns, its perspective, to proffer solutions to problems that it sees as being part of whatever that particular issue might be. And the federal government has an actual, trust responsibility to all federally recognized tribes, so the Seminole Tribe in particular, to adhere to that consultation process, to take in the feedback from the tribe and to work with the tribe truly in a partnership capacity. I will say that the letter of the law and the spirit of the law have not always worked very well. Consultation has been hit and miss, has been abused, has been outright dismissed over the past. This current administration is making a real effort, an unprecedented effort, to redefine how to have meaningful consultation with tribes. And I'm putting that as a context here because the Seminole Tribe has the ability to weigh in on these types of things that are outside of the public specter. And at this time, the tribe has realized that for where its needs and interests lie and what we're seeking to accomplish under LOSOM, entering into this particular fray is not something that is in the tribe's interest right now. So from that perspective, there really is no particular comment that I can give on the bill other than the savings clause that has been something that has been very, very tightly held onto by the agriculture industry. I I think, again, here's one of those instances of politicking and false narratives that that stands to put agriculture as being threatened by some of the proposed manners in which Lake Okeechobee is going to be operated in the future, and that they are worried that they wouldn't have adequate water to meet their needs for their industry. Likewise, they try to piggyback upon fears that there will be a general water supply shortage for the average citizen or other consumptive users that would otherwise be left high and dry under certain scenarios. Again, it's all about how you want to spin something or another, but I can guarantee you that some of the things that are prompting this bill, or the fears prompting this bill, in my opinion, are pretty baseless and are not going to come to fruition. Water supply, let me be 100% clear. Water supply is the number one goal and objective of Everglades restoration, okay? It is not about environment. It isn't. It's not about critters. It's not about plant communities. It's certainly not about culture and tradition, okay? It is about ensuring water supply. Now, in recent years, and I'm saying that as a realist, okay? I don't want it to be that way, but that is really where it's about. That's the number one priority of the Water Management District, and that is the number one priority of the Army Corps of Engineers in terms of all the component projects involved with Cirque. Do they provide for environmental benefit? Of course. Some. But it is in order to ensure better water supply. And the politics of how Lake Okeechobee is managed right now, you might or might not be aware, but it is under an operations schedule that has been an interim operational schedule going back to 2008, called LORS 08, Lake Okeechobee Regulation Schedule 08. And that was done at a time where we're past Katrina, Hurricane Katrina, and the Herbert Hoover Dike, which rims the lake, the southern part of Lake Okeechobee, and protects those communities to the south, was deemed in need of restoration. And because the Army Corps of Engineers redid their whole schedule on how levees and dikes need to be built in order to be sustainable and protective, learning from the mistakes that happened with Katrina, Lake Okeechobee had to be managed in a different way to ensure providing safety for the dike while it was in the process of being revived or repaired. That has been now a 15-year process, roughly. Is my addition correct there? 13 or 14 years, yeah. Something like that. And it's still going to be ongoing, but we're getting closer to the end, okay? And where in recent years, with the way that the lake has been managed, has been a lot to try and keep it artificially high during the dry season in order to provide for water supply, but then that the Army Corps has been draining it very quickly and during the wet season because it wants to be very, very conservative with tropical cyclones that might threaten to dump a lot of water and raise the lake so quickly, because it's not just water that falls on the lake, it's all the water that falls north of it in the Kissimmee River that eventually will be coming into the lake for weeks and months after a particular big event like that, and the lake will be continuing to rise and rise and rise. Well, the way that that has been doing has been equating to a lot of algae blooms, because of those artificial water releases that are laden with nitrogen and phosphorus as being a legacy of that nutrient pollution in Lake Okeechobee, and for which is not going away. Even if all of that loading stopped today, there is such a legacy of nitrogen and phosphorus contained within that lake that for, I think I've seen estimates of hundreds of years to take to either sequester or to allow it to be suspended and then ultimately discharged through managed or natural means by St. Lucie or Caloosahatchee. And so that has had the ag industry very upset, okay, because they see that as a threat to their operations. Long-winded answer to a complicated question. I don't know how that's going to play out. That's really more of a pitting of legislators against the governor and the water management district, in this case, who is under the control of the governor. But the tribe has opted to stay out of that one because the tribe's needs are going to be separate from what this is about. But it is a complicated issue.
So you kind of mentioned something about, so historically the water management districts have dealt with water quantity. There seems to be a push politically to focus on water quality instead. Given kind of what you just mentioned about agriculture, how there's, excessive dumping of nutrients, of phosphorus, of nitrogen, how is that affecting water quality overall in Everglades, and how is that affecting water quality specifically within the Seminole Tribe?
Water quality is the great paradox of Everglades and Everglades Restoration. Water quality is the number one component which is driving a lot of Everglades Restoration. You probably all heard the kind of the catchphrase of getting the timing, the quantity, and the quality of the water right. Okay? So it is those three key components that drive the entirety of the Everglades system, and including then the coastal systems out to the Florida Keys and the Reef Tract. It's all connected that way. Water quality is a constraint on Everglades restoration in many ways. It is a target in others. And it's a constraint because of this paradox I'm speaking to. The way that we have impacted and developed South Florida and the watershed from top to bottom, to say that it's a challenge to have water be clean in the way that it needs to be discharged back into the remaining remnants of the natural system in a way that is not going to be a driver of vegetation community change in the way that it already has been demonstrated to do is going to be the challenge of Everglades restoration, in part because there is no strategy on addressing nutrient pollution at its source. There is no strategy to mitigate and remediate nutrient pollution caused by land use change all throughout the watershed. And I don't mean to pick on agriculture in particular. It's agriculture, it's cattle, it's every single one of us who live here in Florida. We all have an impact that way, whether we have a septic system or we have municipal sewage treatment. Ultimately, that water is still getting back into the system, okay? And in varying degrees of treatment and cleanliness. So there isn't one area that you can point to and say, this, if we can solve this problem, we solve the water quality issue. But there is a reluctance to address that issue because we've got two fundamental problems. We don't have Lake Okeechobee connected back to the historic Everglades in the way that it was supposed to be. We've got an inability to deal with the water that we have in the system right now because we can't send it into the areas that it historically needed to go, because we need to provide for flood control. We need to provide for an ability to people live on the land and to use the land in, there's I think 16 million people in the greater South Florida area. Hearing tribal members speak about what this area here used to be like, water would have been up over the top of this Cheeky in seasonal high water.
Wow.
Okay. And that gives you an indication as to how much water used to be in this system.
Wow.
Okay. And you see how much lower it is now. There is a bellwether gauge that is in Belglade, Florida, which is a little north of here. And it measured the soil level back, I think, maybe around 1910 or 1920. And that difference now is meters different. And that is because as we've dried out the land, you get soil oxidation. It is literally oxidizing and dispersing into the atmosphere. All of the agricultural uses that till the land, that provide that oxidation, not only do they remineralize nutrients that have been bound within either organic matter or directly to calcium carbonate. Phosphorus is bound very heavily to calcium carbonate, which is a huge component of our soils in South Florida. And the various practices, all of those nutrients are becoming available and pulsed out. As soon as we start to rain again, we always see big pulses of water quality. But getting back to your, of nitrogen and phosphorus, excuse me. But getting back to your question about water quality and how it affects the tribe. The tribe, and this is where, you know, for me, it was an aha moment and a duh moment kind of a thing. The tribe is really not at all concerned about nitrogen and phosphorus per se. The tribe is concerned about the legacy of chemicals that are in our water. The tribe is concerned about how land use in its neighbors, of all the agriculture and all of the history of pesticide and herbicide use, how that is affecting water quality. And obviously, we all know that these components are part of our water. If we were to go and measure any of these canals right now that are, you know, that are major drainage canals maintained by the Water Management District or a local district, you're going to find stuff in there that would make you very afraid. Okay, this is the water throughout here, throughout South Florida, really, that fish and game live in, that are accumulating into their tissues, and for which has led to a condition today where tribal members, in large part, cannot and will not exercise their traditional use privileges and purposes for with things like gar or deer or any other types of fishes because of fear about what is contained in those tissues and to the degree with which it is threatening to their human health. Okay, and that is probably the number one concern that I hear consistently from tribal members when it comes to resource management or water quality is that there is a loss of that part of their culture. It's an erosion. It's been a systematic erosion along with many other things, but this is an actual erosion of culture. It you know, for subsistence purposes, tribal members living out here in the landscape, and this isn't that long ago, going back, even in the 1980s, there were still tribal members on reservation lands and off reservation lands that were making a subsistence living traditionally out in the Everglades, living in Cheekies, moving from tree island to tree island, setting new camps. And, you know, bringing housing onto reservation is really a new concept, and one for which this current generation still struggles with. You know, the whole notion of taming, you know, a native culture by way of building Florida-style homes and buildings that, with air conditioning and all of those things that we all take for granted, and for which, you know, tribal youth take for granted now, their parents or their grandparents still struggle with that, you know. But on the water quality issue, the things that we seek to try and infuse into the conversations about what is important in terms of Everglades science, what is important about policy, and ultimately programmatic goals and objectives within the various Cirque component projects, is that nitrogen and phosphorus is very narrow in terms of the overall scope of what water quality goals should be set. as problematic as nitrogen and phosphorus is to try and deal with and control, some of these other chemicals that are very dangerous to all of us are the very literal dirty secret that cannot and will not be addressed by state or federal agencies.
Chemicals such as what?
Well, anything that is put on the land in terms of organic or orgophosphate type or glyphosate, heavy metals, anything that's in agricultural operations can have the ability to be transmitted up into the food chain, through that accumulation. Methyl mercury, while not necessarily a pollutant that is caused by as a point source coming off of ag land, the way that sulfate is changed within water chemistry from some of the chemicals that are making its way lead to a condition where methyl mercury is more pervasive. And that methyl mercury is being concentrated up the food chain as primary producers are being consumed by primary consumers, secondary, tertiary, and then on up to us who eat closer to the top of the food chain. So on specific chemicals, I've got a list right now that I have to work through from the EPA on where the tribe is looking to set and establish water quality standards on the reservation, which it has the ability to do as a sovereign nation and treatment as a state. It is a dizzying list of chemicals that way.
So let's kind of go to your work about seagrass. Discuss just very generally the seagrass kind of component within the Everglades, and then elaborate about how seagrass die-offs are affecting kind of a lot of the things you kind of just mentioned.
Okay. Well, seagrasses, again, being in estuarine systems that are at the bottom of the watershed. So they're receiving the fresh water that comes off the land and mixing with the water that comes from the ocean, or the Gulf. Same thing, basically. These are the communities that thrive in the oligotrophic, mostly oligotrophic surface waters that would have been characteristic of the Everglades. Now, it's not universally, the idea here. Certainly, as we look toward the Gulf of Mexico side, there are a lot more nutrients coming in that system, in that part of the system, than you would have in the eastern side with the Atlantic Ocean. The Gulf Stream is a real good diluter of surface water, and so typically nutrient concentrations are lower. In Florida Bay, there is a very, very tight and marked gradient of phosphorus availability within the system, which is the limiting nutrient, in this case, in this system for seagrasses. Nutrients to seagrasses are inherently good for them in that it helps to boost productivity. It's pretty easy to understand, and while that's been documented through numerous empirical study, we all know we put fertilizer on plants, they grow better. Okay, if they have everything else they need, right? But again, the paradox of too many nutrients in a system that is naturally low nutrient or even oligotrophic leads to a regression of that successional stage, where now you have changed a benthic plant community dominated system, and you've reverted it back to a phytoplankton based system, because phytoplankton are much more efficient at quickly being able to uptake nutrients from the system than seagrasses are, for example. And then they tightly hold those nutrients within the system in their way that as soon as those cells are dying and lysing out all of those nutrients, there are cells right there to uptake. So when you get into a situation where you've injected nutrients into it's an open but still a relatively closed system, for talking about Florida Bay, it is not expressly open to flushing in the way that the Gulf Stream, for example, flushes the east coast of Florida. Those nutrients can be recycled within the system, and it becomes problematic. You have a lot of light attenuation, and eventually you are leading to a condition where you get seagrass decline and death because of a lack of productivity. You get a higher load of epiphytes growing on the seagrass blades themselves because they are able to take advantage of the nutrients within the system, which further shades out the ability for the plants to be photosynthetic. And then you lead to a system where seagrass die-off occurs. All of the fine sediments that are contained and held by the root system of the seagrasses become drawn up into the water column, further providing more source of nutrients. So it's a really negative feedback loop that occurs and takes quite of a long time to reset itself and go back through that successional change of community transition back to more climax seagrass community distribution. Now, how does that factor into Everglades restoration? Well, seagrasses being as important as they are as nurseries for 85% of fishes that and invertebrates that are commercially viable and needed here in South Florida. Not only do they provide that for food, but ultimately it drives a $40+ billion sport fishing industry here in Florida, where anglers are targeting seagrass environments particularly, or the fishes that they go and seek out in the reef are starting part of their life or living part of their life in seagrass habitats and mangrove habitats. And the degree to which seagrasses are being demonstrated as important carbon sinks, and their ability to quite literally hold the land in those coastal environments, thus providing for better overall water quality in terms of how it looks. Tourists want to come to Florida and see the beautiful, clear coastal waters, okay? Seagrasses are very important for helping to ensure that, because all of those fine particulates that would otherwise be floating and suspended in the water column are attenuated and held in place, thus providing for those clear waters in a lot of areas. And so they are a key component or metric with which Everglades restoration is going to be judged in terms of either retaining or enhancing existing seagrass habitats, or allowing for restoration and regeneration of habitats that have been impacted. Indian River Lagoon being an example here.
Can you tell us a little bit about some of those restoration efforts that the tribes themselves have done for the past couple years, and what are some of those difficulties that they have struggled with in that process?
So that's a really good question. The tribe was actually a guinea pig for what we now know as Cirque, going back to the early 1990s. And when it was identified that Everglades restoration was going to be something that is a needed thing, the Army Corps of Engineers approached Seminole and Miccosukee tribes, the Seminole Tribe, as a test case to see where locally improvements in water quality can be made by way of affecting or turning portions of the Big Cypress Reservation into larger holding cells of water. Okay, basins, these large basins that are wetland, cypress wetland in particular, and other forested wetland components. And the idea here is that, and here's a little bit of an example of how present day thoughts and attitudes of the tribe toward the Army Corps are very sour. This project, which was deemed as, it's called the Big Cypress Critical Restoration Project, what it really was intended to do was to take ag water that is otherwise supplied to the tribe as part of the tribe's water rights compact that it has with the state of Florida. The only water rights compact for an Indian tribe east of the Mississippi River, established in 1987, and which lays out the responsibility of the state, in this case, to supply water to the Seminole Tribe for its use. That is different and separate in the way that the Water Management District otherwise provides water for consumptive use, permitted use. We haven't even touched on the Water Rights Compact, but getting back to the Big Cypress restoration, the idea is that water that was coming into the reservation would be navigated into these large holding basins where, very similarly to how stormwater treatment areas act today, it's a matter of residence time and giving the plants the ability to uptake nutrients. And then that water eventually could be utilized and sent further south into the tribe's area we call the native area, which is a 14,000 acre remnant of the Big Cypress watershed that is really a jewel of habitat that is maybe unique now amongst the remainder of Big Cypress habitat in general. And ultimately, it was a water project to help clean up ag water from the north. Again, this whole point of the paradox of nutrients and restoration, the inability to address source cleanup of water. And the tribe, this was a boondoggle of a project, unfortunately, that cost the tribe tens of millions of dollars as a cost share with the Army Corps of Engineers, was very restrictive in the manner that the programmatic agreement that the tribe had with the Corps in how these areas were to be maintained. And ultimately, it never worked. The water never was able to be retained within these basins because there was not adequate geotechnology done ahead of the project to understand the Swiss cheese nature of the water, of the land underlying. The water would drain out as quickly as it was put in. And so it never, ever achieved, despite all of the engineering, despite the 40-some pump stations that were installed on the Big Cypress Reservation and the system of moving water against nature, against gravity, against grade, in order to try and artificially put water into places where, at this point, it's not suitable or able to be held in the way that the land has been impacted. We had that project deauthorized last year as part of the WRDA 2020 Water Resources Development Act 2020 bill, which is an every other year congressional bill that lays out water resource development for the federal government. Okay, this is only one of two projects in the country, in the state of Florida, and only a handful of federal projects countrywide that have ever been deauthorized. Okay, it took literally the act of Congress to do it, but because it was something that the tribe was not going to ever see a benefit from and was going to still be on the hook indefinitely forever in terms of costs, we said enough is enough, and we want to cut this off, and we want to return the tribe its ability to do with that land what it might want to at a future time. Okay? And so that was a precursor of a project to what now became Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan and all of the 50-some component projects of Cirque. Now, I'm quite certain that the Army Corps learned a whole heck of a lot from the way that restoration project went very, very badly. Okay, and I know that where we stand today in terms of the evolution of these federal projects and how their design and scope has changed is actually resultant of what the tribe actually suffered through, and for which ultimately proved inefficient and gave no benefit to the tribe. So restoration on the reservation as being pursued or facilitated by the federal government has been disastrous. But in terms of what the tribe has sought to do on its own, in the way that the tribe manages its resources, its water resources, and develops its water resources. It's really only been in recent years that the tribe has really sought to assert itself much more in terms of its own operations of water on reservation. I've been in my position here with the Environmental Resource Management Department for about 2.5 years. And in that 2.5 years, it's been an express goal of mine to really assert that sovereignty by way of bringing better control of how the tribe manages its water. The tribe has to work in a partnership capacity with the Water Management District and the Army Corps of Engineers when it comes to some of the larger water control structures that are part of the larger conveyance and drainage system. But the tribe is now, instead of being reactive and being subject to the whims and schedules that might not suit the needs of the tribe of these various entities and agencies, the tribe now actually directs the agencies on when some of these water control structures are managed and moved, raised, lowered, in order to ensure that the tribe can make the most of its water resources, hold as much water on the land as it needs for its irrigation purpose, for its enhancement of natural areas, and so that's been a good development here. It has been a fundamental change in the way that the tribe works with the agencies.
I love it. That provides more agency on their end, like the tribe taking that control somewhat to an extent. So I'm happy to hear that at least you guys are taking back that control and kind of like working around it. What are some of the struggles on that end that you face trying to get through that? So
I had mentioned before that the tribe has a water rights compact, and
so we just want to make sure.
no, it's okay. We've got some time. I'm not the only person who's taking part in the 10 o'clock, and we're having good discussion.
I'll be keeping an eye on it.
But the Water Rights Compact, established in 1987, was a compact between the Seminole Tribe, the state of Florida, and the federal government. And what it effectively does is it establishes that the tribe has inherent rights to water here in Florida. And in Florida, nobody owns water. Whether you're a landowner or anybody else, you've got water on your property, the water underneath your land. You don't own it. The state owns the water on behalf and in trust for all citizens of the state of Florida, which is very different than out west, where Western tribes have to contend with the fact that landowners do have ownership of water, okay, on their land, under the land. And so a lot of these tribes have had to go to the extreme litigative matters in order to get water for themselves on their federal reservations. Now, why is a water compact important for the Seminole Tribe here when nobody owns the water and the tribe should have access to the water that it needs that anybody else would? Well, that's not also the case either. The Water Management District gives permitted use to all people based on what your land use is needed for, and based on that permitted review. So a municipality has a permitted use to supply its utilities. A farmer gets a certain amount of consumptive use to be able to provide irrigation to his or her crops or cattle. And if you live in a home that has a well system, you also get a consumptive water use, permit use from your county, who gets it from the Water Management District, so on and so forth. The tribe being a federal sovereign nation this way, or a sovereign nation and with that federal recognition, is not subject to the laws of the state. Okay? So therefore, in order that the tribe would have to get its water, it would have to subjugate itself to the state laws, which is an erosion of its sovereignty. Okay? The tribe deals with the federal government on a government-to-government level. But for the ease of discussion, the tribe is above in terms of its government relationship to states or local authorities that way. What the compact did is it established a quasi government-to-government relationship with the Water Management District for the purpose of ensuring that the district takes on the express responsibility stated by law to supply the tribe the water that it needs. And that was recognized by the Florida cabinet and governor, and then recognized by the United States Congress. Okay, it is facto law. The Water Management District officially doesn't have the ability to say, no, we're not going to give you the water that you need. How do we know, or how do we decide what the tribe needs in terms of its water? It's not just an open book, for example, to say, we want this, the tribe wants this much water, therefore you're going to supply it. The tribe perfects its water rights through the compact, through a de facto standard operating procedure known as the criteria manual, which is the rules of engagement, so to speak, of how the tribe and now the state agency of the Water Management District work these things out. How we talk to each other, the degree to which we recognize each other's, or the state in this case recognizes the tribe's sovereignty, and the degree to which the ultimate progress of how the tribe continues to put forward what it needs for its water use through a process called the annual work plan submittal process. Every year, our department submits to the Water Management District an annual work plan for all the reservations for which the compact covers. And in this case, that is 5 of the tribe's 8 reservations. Okay, that would be Hollywood, parts of Coconut Creek, Immokalee, here, Big Cypress, and Brighton. Those are the 5 reservations covered under the compact because those were the 5 reservations that were online at the time of the compact. The parts of the Coconut Creek reservation that have come on into trust after the water compact are not subject to the compact, and there's a whole different set of rules on how that works, which is a little confusing. But then the Fort Pierce Reservation up on the northeast side of the coast here, and the Lakeland Reservation closer to you guys there, and Tampa, they are not subject to the compact. So we still have to operate under a different set of rules in terms of that water supply. But for surface water delivery, we send a work plan to the district every year that states, here is the degree of land use that requires irrigation, for example. Okay, the tribe has a lot of cattle. They're one of the largest cattle producers in the state and country for 1- and 2-year calves. Some of that surface water is used for other agricultural operations. And some of that surface water is used to supply for irrigation purposes at government buildings. This one may be an example that way, okay? The tribe's potable water, all right, is drawn out of the ground, okay, again, through a different work plan amendment process, okay? And then it is treated by the tribe's own water treatment plants to provide that potable source for tribal members to drink in their homes and whatever else, okay? Or for casinos. Now, that water, once that work plan goes in, is reviewed. Sometimes there's a negotiation, and then it becomes the new standard or baseline for which the tribe's water use is established. Excuse me. It is supposed to represent the current need. In terms of where we go in the future, that has been a major undertaking that we have done here in the last 2 years, understanding where LOSAM is trending and understanding to the degree with which we might expect that there might be threats to the tribe's water supply. We've sought to do and interpret the water compact as a legal document in a way to assert the tribe's water needs in a way that secures them for the future. The tribe has a traditional lens with which they seek to do things today. And that is, we do things for the purpose of looking forward 7 generations. Okay? What we do today might affect 7 generations ahead. What we're seeking to do in this department and with our legal counsel is to establish the future water needs for the tribe for 7 generations and beyond. Where that work plan amendment process has always been a year-to-year thing, we put in an annual work plan that would lay out the ceiling of all of the surface water that would be required. And then we did this only for the Brighton Reservation right now. We're seeking to do so for the Big Cypress Reservation in a scenario where the tribe has completely built out and developed the reservation for agricultural purposes. So what that ceiling would hit then means that from where we are here today up to that ceiling, whether it's 50 years, 100 years, 500 years, there's only so much land on the reservation. And therefore, we would expect that as the tribe develops, it's likely not to develop every single acre and square foot of land on the reservation for agriculture purposes. But we want to make sure that we've captured that all the way up. So wherever we fall short, we know that the tribe is always going to have its water needs met.
So I guess that's a great transition to our last kind of brief set of questions. How do you define conservation and how do you define sustainability? Or, maybe in a definition, what do those two terms mean to you?
How do I define those things personally?
Yeah.
Okay. And this is I appreciate the question because I suspect that you're going to get different answers from different people about this.
Yeah, and that's every single person's question.
I am not a bleeding heart. I am one who understands the reality that we're using the land, we've impacted the land. We need to continue to develop the land to meet needs. We're not seeing less people wanting to come to Florida. And, whether I'm looking at this within the lens of me as a Florida citizen or me, one who serves the needs of the Seminole Tribe, it's really the same. Conservation and sustainability, in my opinion, and in my viewpoint, comes down to what can we do to address and do things in a way that allows the system, the natural system that supports everything that we do and everywhere we live here in Florida, allows the system to provide the services that it can, and the services we value as human beings, and including those services that provide for the actual ability for wildlife, for natural biogeochemical processes, for carbon cycling, all of those things. We want to have a system that doesn't need to be overly managed in order for it to accomplish this for itself. If you look at the system as being somewhat of a to anthropomorphize the environment as a living being, what can we do to put that system in position to stand on its own 2 feet, to not have to worry about billions and billions of dollars invested in pumps and water treatment and all of these things to mimic what Mother Nature could do on her own if we're just a little smarter about how we are doing things today and how we are planning to do things tomorrow. So, less manipulation on the system and allowing for, again, those processes to occur on its own. And that is really important in terms of what is sustainable. Well, we are facing a future of rising seas. That is not a matter of debate. That is happening. We are facing an uncertain future of potentially a different climate here where we can expect hotter temperatures. We can expect our monsoonal rain patterns to be perhaps different. We're certainly already seeing a degree with which we're experiencing extreme rain events, which puts a real hard part on how we manage water and flooding. we want to make sure that the processes that are happening at that coastal margin are being supported. Can mangroves continue to build land and hold land in a way that matches sea level rise? Can seagrass habitats continue to attenuate some of that sediment that would otherwise be running off into the ocean or being buried by incoming seas, and then therefore not available for some of our coastal plant communities to be able to hold that organic matter, build land, and keep us from being flooded? Can we continue to have enough water on the land to percolate into our superficial aquifers to keep sea water from advancing inland and polluting our freshwater drinking sources, rather than shunting it off to the coast as quickly as it comes onto the land, because we've got no way to deal with flooding issues and drainage and to support people living here, but we've got nowhere else to put it right now. And because of water quality and a lack of connection back to the natural environment, we can't put it where it needs to go, right? So that if we could set the system up to do those things, that's what I would see as being sustainable. Is the Everglades going to be what it was? No. If you think it's going to be, you're wrong. It's not. This is the biggest experiment being conducted to understand what human beings are going to make a decision on what kind of an environment and what kind of ecological services we want to see out of the system. That's what this restoration is about.
And since I know you have to go, last two questions. How do you define sustainable development? That kind of just goes into what you were just saying. And then finally, after that, if you have any kind of last words to anybody that's listening.
So sustainable development, is as much of a buzzword as it is still in a development in action, in my opinion. Do we know what sustainable development is? Honestly, I don't know. I don't know. I wouldn't try to be arrogant enough to tell you that I do know. What I think of, or what I try to be a proponent of, and particularly here serving the tribe, and the tribe is in an unprecedented amount of development on its reservations right now. There is an extreme amount of demand to provide more housing for tribal members who want to come back and live on the reservation. And with those people coming to live here, they need and deserve all of the same services that we get from our governments, fire departments, police departments, healthcare, schools, all of those things. And so all of that development is occurring right now. And what we're seeking to do as a tribal government, and for which my department has a very important part to play, is helping the tribe make decisions that are based in information and provide that foundation for informed decision making. Do you want to put your next housing development in an area that is a cypress dome right now because you think it might be nice and pretty and that you get these mature cypress trees? You can do that, but that's going to take a lot of effort. It's going to take a lot of permitting. It's going to take a lot of fill. It's going to take a lot of change to that hydrology to allow people to live there and not have water coming up into their homes. Or do we want to look to these different areas of higher ground? Do we want to reclaim some of the old agriculture fields that are sitting there fallow right now, and use those as opportunities to develop in a way that that is less of an impact? The tribe is really, really focused on ensuring that its very limited resources at this time, given the amount of land, are preserved. It is a matter of cultural heritage. The trees, the water, certainly, and everything that lives in between are cultural resources. There is no differentiation between, traditionally speaking, between what you or I might call a natural resource, land, water, wildlife, versus a cultural resource. Archaeological artifacts, old camps, and most specifically, buried ancestors, those burial resources. They're not differentiated in culture. They are all cultural resources. And so for us, what sustainable means is ensuring that we are protecting and that we are giving the ability for those 7 generations to be able to take part in their culture and their tradition that way, to help the tribe manage lands in a way that promotes some of the important plant communities for which medicine is harvested from and utilized, and to support the continuation of all of those ceremonial uses that I am not privy to, but for which I know that I am charged with, and my team are with, to protect the ability to maintain that. And it is a challenge. The land is so impacted. It is so different than the way it used to be that it is challenging to try and keep things from constantly changing. Florida is quick to change. It is quick to respond. But I'm hopeful, okay? I'm always hopeful that we can do things in a better way, and that while we're not necessarily going to be able to right all the wrongs, I think we can get to a point where we can attain a new stasis, of a system that doesn't need to be overly managed, that doesn't need to be in a constant state of decline or spiraling decline in many instances, that will be robust and be resilient in order to deal with all of the stochastic events that happen here in Florida. Fires, which are important for regeneration but are destructive. Those abilities for those communities to regenerate. Tropical cyclones, rising seas, changing rainfall patterns, all of those things. Florida can be very resilient that way, and has proven to be so if we give it the chance. And so the tribe is really, having been here thousands of years, and with the tribal ecological knowledge contained, I'm using my platform here and being able to work as ingrained within the efforts here in Everglades Restoration to show that there is an ability for us to think about how human beings factor into Everglades Restoration. All of you, me, the tribe, and people who are here to come. There is so much to learn from. It does not need to be narrowly focused on nitrogen and phosphorus. It's an important component, but one for which I'm hopeful that we can be more broad in the way that we look at what ultimately the goals of a sustainable, robust, well-functioning system that can provide ecological services in the way that we need them to.
Fantastic. Well, I think that wraps up the interview. I do know you have to get going, and I really appreciate your time, sir. Thank you.
This has been great. I really appreciate you all coming out and meeting me here.
It's a pleasure. Wow, it's been phenomenal. Thank you for your time.